All right. Despite the technical difficulties, we're back. Okay, Emily, let's go again.
Okay, that was terrifying, right? Hearing myself once is frightening, and hearing myself on a loop 17 times over is a nightmare. Anywho, so right before we pushed record, you had asked me if the chemtrailing had pulled back here, what it was like. I live in Los Angeles, and I was saying that, at the beginning of the lockdown, it was like hardly ever happening, right? And then over time, after a few months, it kind of went back to its normal level, which would be like, we'd have a few weeks without it, then kind of a few weeks where it was a little bit, and then heavy for a few weeks and whatnot. But the last few weeks, like I'd say, since the beginning of the year, or maybe since, the January 6th or something like that, it's been heavy pretty much every day, and with a full variety of different types of chemtrails. And you would ask me about the different types of chemtrails, and so I thought that's when we said, let's start recording, right? So, so the different types of chemtrails, at least what we see here in Los Angeles, and I've seen most of these same kinds other places that I visited and traveled and have lived too. You have like your standard just lines across the sky or X's in the sky, right? The classic, what everybody thinks of when they think of a chemtrail. And then you have like the things that look like they have ripples and waves in them, and those look like they've, that's like harp waves. Some people call them like harp waves or something like that, where, it looks just like a full panel of stuff with vibration throughout them. And you have some lower down ones that just look like multicolored sort of fake clouds. Like they'll be like white, some will be gray, but they look like not real natural clouds, right? And then the ones that to me are the most interesting are the cloud cloak crafts. I don't know if you're familiar with the cloaked craft clouds.
How you've seen them, yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that I became, I had been noticing obviously a bunch of oddities in the skies for years, but sometime around 2012, maybe a little before that, I was turned on to a YouTube channel called Industrial Surrealism, and I began watching this gentleman show me how that there were these very bizarre clouds in the sky that seemed to have geometric structures or shape inside of them. And over the course of several months, I basically discovered that there's these crafts, right? The gentleman's name is Sean Gautreaux, and since then he's become a friend, and I've had him on my show several times. And there's these crafts that seem to generate a cloud cover around them, right? And these are a little different than your standard chemtrails, though they interact with them. Sometimes it seems like they're vacuuming the chemtrails up. These crafts do. Like sometimes there's an interesting sort of back and forth or play between them. And these crafts also have smaller crafts that pop off of them and generate their own field of, stuff. And it's quite bizarre, and I've never seen anybody else document it in quite the way he does. And I wouldn't say that he was necessary. He's not your standard conspiratorial guy kind of thing. He's an artist and a photographer, and the way he fell upon this information, as he was uncovering this, you could tell he was as disturbed and mystified by it as any normal person would be. He wasn't looking for this. He literally fell upon it. And his work, he doesn't really put up videos anymore, but it's all still there. And I recommend for people to really understand sort of how weird it is to like go back to the beginning of his channel and start watching from there. And
cool.
I've had conversations for years, still unclear about what this is. Are these military crafts? Are these alien? Are they even technology, or are they some sort of like primordial stingray kind of thing that have like sort of electrobiology to them, like biological luminescent kind of qualities and whatnot? Like, is it synthetic? It's not still not clear, right? But those to me are the weird.
There is sort of a consistency, though. There are all those things, but there is a consistency about it, so you can say that like it is a thing. So
it's a thing. Yeah.
Industrial what?
It's a thing, and there's a lot of reference to the phenomenon he shows in different like historical, spiritual, biblically kind of texts or mythological kinds of texts. So there's that, and then there's also like some of the more recent stuff I've been looking into, which goes to not only the stuff in the sky, but earth structure and vibration as well. And that may be that a lot of the chemtrails are actually there to cover the reflection that's showing in the sky of the mechanistic processes that are happening under the ground. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, the YouTube channel is FPV Angel. And you can spend a long time there and still not quite understand what you're looking at. But, there's not just one type of chemtrail or one type of chemtrail programming. There's many things going on for many reasons. And, so we all know the typical stories about chemtrails, your regular, the information you get from, Alana Freeland and Matt Landman and Dave Wigington. We know all those things, but there's a weirder side to it as well, and more sort of metaphysical, bizarre, what is really going on here. Yeah. So
I'd love to dive down that. So I do check out FPV Angel, and then the other one's Industrial what? And it's Sean.
Industrial surrealism. Like, to me, I'm more interested in the weird stuff than just being told that, like, I'm being poisoned with stuff coming out of airplanes in the sky. Like, and that, not that isn't true, but like, that's boring, and I'm not that interested in.
I'm with you on that. Yeah,
that's like a fantastic story to go along with my poisoning.
That's right. And it's Sean. What is it, Cottrell or something?
Sean Gautreaux. But it's just industrial surrealism on YouTube.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
I'll link it a little bit later. Awesome. Wow. Sweet. So not to reflect what's going on down here. Wait, what do you mean?
What do you mean?
So they're blocking what the reflection of what might be.
So I'll just give a basic, because I want people to go check out their channel, because every time I talk about it, I like might even say, do I even know what I'm talking about? Like, they basically that's it's a really complex topic, but basically our Earth is kind of like a giant technological, like sort of organically technological realm that is made up of sort of a mechanistic underground related to particle accelerators and colliders and things like that we think of as being modern inventions, but that have actually been there since the Earth has been around, and it's part of the Earth. And the people who pretend like they created them are actually just trying to figure out how they work and letting us think that they created them. And that the processes that these linear accelerators or particle accelerators or particle colliders, or different ways people like to refer to them, when they're adjusting or turning on or going through their processes, it creates an energy field that the sort of process is reflecting in the sky. Like when they're sort of adjusting or turning on or doing what they do, doing their process, we can see the reflection of that movement in the sky. And that the things that show up in the sky, which include what they refer to as the luminaries, which are the things we think of as planets and stars and whatnot, are both a reflection and an interactive technology of their own that interact both with us and what we think of as the atmosphere.
That was like that. It really has a lot to do with something I had just a list of things to talk about if we didn't come up with something. I knew we would anyway, but funny enough, one of them was that the idea of CERN and the fishbowl, Project Fishbowl thing, and that just adds another dimension to it, what you're talking about now. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I really would I want people to go look at their stuff, because I think it's complicated to understand, and in my opinion, partially because of the language they've chosen to use to describe it. And I'm sure that they have. I've had some background conversations with them. At some point, I'll do a show with them, but it's hard to get them all together. It's a whole team of people, and they've been having some struggles and whatnot. But I'm sure that there's probably a good reason for the language that they've chosen. But until you have a full understanding of what that is and how everything they're saying works together, the language can be kind of confusing, both like in my opinion and in other people who watch my material or who I talk to. Like, they're trying to understand both what it means and what it means, like on a multiple levels, right?
Sure.
So, but essentially the idea is what we've been told or what's been written about in biblical and historical texts as angels are actually particle accelerators. And particle accelerator has its own unique characteristics and generates energy and causes certain things to happen in the local environment and whatnot. And these kind of qualities and energies, when described, sound like the description of the personality of a grand character. So through our mythological texts, including the Bible and, the Vedic text and Bhagavad Gita and all this kind of stuff, some of the characters that have been described to us that we think of as people, because we're people, so we think of things that sound like they're descriptions of people as people, but also the phenomenon of the human brain being split, where we seem to try to personify certain kinds of, it's called applying, I always forget which side of the brain is the creative and which side is the logical, but applying the logical brain to the creative content, right, kind of thing, instead of just understanding that these are energies and whatever, we want to have a focus point for where they're coming from and what's causing it, and we tend to think of those as gods or angels or spirits or whatever, right? And so, right, like there's, I guess they're aware of 30,000 of these angels or particle accelerators in our world right now, and they exist both on land, underwater. They're all kind of around, and they each have their own unique process and then interplay between them that creates sort of the makeup of our reality. Right?
You're talking about the known ones, right? Like the ones that a man has like documented or whatever.
There's 30. I think there's been 30,000 identified so far, right? And then they also say, and I'm not, again, I suggest people go over. And I had no idea we were going to talk about this today. Otherwise, I would have thought it would work there.
No, yeah.
But the YouTube channel is FPV Angel, and they call themselves the Angelic Particle Matrix Research Team. They call that's what they title their research. And that, there's also 144,000 like control rooms or sarcophagi for what's going on, in the ground. And that's what the 144,000 of the Bible refers to. So I don't think that they're particularly Christian, although I think at least one or maybe more members of their team may be, but it's not like a religious thing, right? It's kind of more like a different understanding of these texts. They go into a ton of stuff. And I've watched hours of it and still only feel like I'm just beginning to understand what they're talking about. But it's interesting to watch, and they've made their channel very beautiful. They've created all sorts of graphics and videos with music. And what's really interesting is, and I've talked to FPV and another member named Sandra of their team. And a lot, I asked them, I said, what's really weird to me is a lot of your graphics and the items of art to reflect what you're talking about that you guys have generated are very reflective of my remote views that I've been having for years and years. And they said, we get that a lot. And so for me, like the reason I like sort of their paradigm or what they were kind of describing, which I have no way of knowing for sure if it's true or not, just like we don't know anything, right? We think we know shit, but we don't really know. But it resonates for me both on, it allows a lot of room for explanation of phenomena that I have been researching for years and years, and that is the most interesting to me. And it also, it matches things that I know from my inner knowing, right? So when you have a remote view and then you see something that looks exactly like something you only saw in your own mind, there's a resonance there that maybe it's not the one and only truth, but it's an important truth, or it's something, there's something that it makes it more interesting than when you've only seen it in your own mind, right? Because it means that at least someone else has seen it in their mind to create that piece of art, right? So if multiple people are seeing the same thing, it's more likely that that's actually a thing than if it's only one person, and that could just be, that's still a thing. It's the content of their own mind. But, when you have people who, like, I don't do what he does with computer graphics and maps and stuff like that. That's not but what I do. So the fact that I'm seeing the things that are on his stuff in my own mind, not necessarily knowing that what I was looking at was actually some kind of map, I just thought it was like, I'm looking at geometric shapes with colors and whatever, right? So it is interesting though. So people should go check that out. They've put a lot of time into it.
Totally fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like it sort of ties back to the cloaked clouds you were talking about, we were talking about, is like that commonality. It's like it's a thing. I mean, people see it in different ways, but they see a common thing out of that thing.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, maybe is it like that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. This is more. I mean, Sean was literally just documenting what he saw in the sky, and then like trying to figure out what it was. Whereas I think what they've done more is they've tried to create, at least for the purpose of people being able to understand the sort of largesse of what they're talking about, some kind of more cohesive narrative that brings in maps, geometry, ancient history, ancient art, biblical stories. Like they're trying to weave a grand narrative so that people can have a full understanding, because we each understand things in different ways. They've spent a ton of time working on this. And so it's not something that a person can expect to understand in 30 minutes. Right? Yeah.
I have playlists stacked. I'm ready for them. Speaking of that,
what?
Just real quick, I was just going to say that just because my mind, takes shifts and stuff, we can come right back to what we were talking about. But I'm not getting notifications of all of your videos, even though I have the little bell thing.
Interesting.
Do you get that from anybody else?
You're the first person that said it to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I don't understand why.
Just today, I found like your thing with Robert Phoenix. That was, I guess, yesterday or something. And
yeah.
So
okay.
anyway.
So I don't know. I'll find out. I'll ask around. Cool. But what I was saying is, if people there's probably a lot of people out there, because you're a spiritual cat and you hang out with, I imagine, people who also are into, some of those kinds of bodies of work that provide both intellectual and sort of metaphysical understanding of things. Their stuff matches up pretty well with Walter Russell's work. If anyone's ever looked into Walter Russell, his work, it kind of really goes well together. Yeah. And then there was someone else and then it also, like, if you're into like I am, like drawing out the truths from what's presented to us in pop culture. The recent TV series, The Man in the High Castle, you kind of pull all that stuff together. You're like, okay, I think I see something that is reminiscent of what's going on here. So
that's a new one. The Man in the High Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It just wrapped up this past year. It's a 4 seasons. Yeah.
Was it on Netflix or something?
It was on Prime, Amazon Prime.
Oh, cool. Okay.
It's very good. Yeah.
I haven't checked out so many things that I need to check out, but I'll add that to the list. Wow. Yeah.
So anyway, so that's yeah. But that one's a big rabbit hole, and so like I don't know that it's possible to like do a deep dive on it and understand it all quickly. You have to swim around in it for a while to get it. Thank you, Amanda.
Yes. Thanks, Amanda. I'll check. It's definitely something I'll probably on my end for sure. But that'll be an interesting talk that you had with Robert, I bet too.
All the talks with Robert are interesting.
Totally. So did you brought up something, I think last time we talked about, this is sort of a weird little connection, but the time travel guy, and then you were talking about how it related to the sensory deprivation tanks and the movie Altered States. And I had this weird memory from when I was a kid, because I spent a lot of time in California visiting family growing up, and we visited this one place. I don't remember what the deal was. It was a wax museum maybe, but they had this adjunct thing to it called the Black Box, and it was like this interactive horror like thing that you went through, and it was like basically being on the set, and it was terrifying. It was like the scene from Alien, and then they had a scene from Altered States, and it was just this bizarre freaking thing. I just wondered if you had any memory of anything like that.
I'm looking it up right now. Do you remember the Black Box at Movieland Wax Museum? So I've never been to the Wax Museum in my conscious state. I'm not saying that I haven't been there in other states. But I haven't heard of it. But I will say that they offered a lot of these strange experiences at amusement parks and things like that, right? Like, so I'm trying to see what it says here. The black box was opened.
A lot of weird memories of stuff like that. And
it was a separate walkthrough attraction that featured 3 immersive scenes, each from a different horror film, designed to put you in the middle of some of film's history's most frightening scenes. Okay, so what was your experience there now?
I remember Alien and the Altered States, and I can't remember the other one right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here it says, I don't think I've actually ever seen the movie Altered States, but it says here, the set we next enter is Altered States. The film is about a scientist who experiments with hallucinatory drugs and sensory deprivation with dire consequences. In the center of the industrial room sits a large sensory deprivation tank. We can see through the tank's windows that a man is inside. An experiment begins to go wrong. The piping around the set begins to shudder and rattle. Steam shoots from within the pipes out onto the crowd. The scene climaxes with the head of the deformed man in the tank now breaking out of the top hatch and water sprays everywhere. Okay, so you can go into... Okay, so yes. So what you're saying... Okay, now I lost where you are.
Weird lights and strobes and... Oh, my God.
I have to find back to the window that I had you open in. Hold on a second, Yogi. Just a second.
Sure.
Okay. So, yes. So basically you can go and watch, there's many varieties of this same type of thing in lots of the television series that we get now as entertainment, right? But yes, okay. So basically, when did you go there? Probably what, in the 80s?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so I'd say that this was a very underground kind of technology that they were experimenting with, mostly in the 70s and into the early 80s. So my guess would be that the very next thing they did was move it to amusement parks, right? Like I had an experience at Marineland when I was a kid that I know various other people have had.
I've had weird ones at Marineland.
Right,
Okay.
and you're saying this one at the Wax Museum. So it's something that they go and they don't actually put people inside of it, but they show it to people to see what the response is going to be, right? So you were watching it. You weren't actually in the box. You were watching the box, right? You were watching the guy in the sensory deprivation tank.
Yes, but we were in like sort of a theater, like a black box theater.
Right.
It was like theater, but interactive, like a very avant-garde.
Right, but he was actually in the sensory deprivation tank, and then you were in an isolated room watching what was happening to the person in the sensory depravation tank.
We were right there with him. Like the tank, we were all standing around the tank, basically.
He was inside the tank.
Yeah.
Okay, this makes sense to me on a lot of levels, right? So first we have it's going on underground. It's just private. It's classified kind of experiments. Then they start to move it out to different places. Now, my experience at Marineland was not for the massive groups. It was something that was underground and off to the side, but that came a little bit later. It's a little more public. Then there's something like what you're talking about, right? Where it's kind of like a side attraction at the Waxland Museum, but it's this really weird thing and it leaves a very strong impression on you. But likely what they were doing was checking to see what people's take on this would be. Like how bothered would people be by this? Would it scare people? Would it intrigue people? Would they buy it? Then in the 90s, we get raves, right? And it's my assertion that raves are a black box experience, right? That it's got lights and colors and sounds being flashed at people that are all in an enclosed space. Some of them are on drugs, right? And it's a very easy thing to surveil. And you can have, each party is different, so you can experiment with different sounds, different lights, different drugs, right? And people it's just a party happening naturally. Some of the sound and lighting guys are some of the most occult, esoteric type of people who have this kind of knowledge. A lot of them are in secret societies or work for weapons companies or things like that, right? So you have that situation. Then you go forward to sort of where we are now, where we both are going to flotation tanks and things like that for healing or a relaxation experience. And we're also watching television programs like Stranger Things, Fringe, the o.O11O.o, all of these shows that are about, on some level, time travel, mind control, interdimensional existence, all that kind of stuff. They're all exposing us to watching people be in sensory deprivation tanks And sometimes it's a very realistic feeling where you almost feel like you're in it with them, and other times it's just the observation. The most recent one that sounds like almost exactly what you described was there was a movie on, I think it was on Netflix, called Project Power. And there's a scene actually at an underground nightclub of somebody in a sensory deprivation tank, and it starts to go wrong, and they basically explode. They're inside the tank. It sounds like it's exactly what you witnessed in the Movie Land museum.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's the revelation of the method.
Wow. Interesting. So, and that's weird that it has those ties to the Marine Land, because I have some, now I've got to ask you about stuff like that too. But what about, so the other two things in the black box, I'm sure there were two more. So there was aliens, and it felt like you stepped onto the alien ship.
Yeah.
And then like the alien thing was like crawling around everywhere. It was like all around you, you know, all around us. And they were like, they made it seem like it was running under your feet and shit. And it was really, again, terrifying. And I don't remember the other one, if it was Halloween or if it was something else.
I think it said something about Mike Myers, so that might have been Halloween.
It was Halloween, yeah, for Mike Myers. Oh my God, that's right.
So my guess would be, as far as like so it's this is not, I can't say this right, because it's not that I don't think that aliens or other things kind of exist, or that there aren't UFOs or whatever, but I think that's a different phenomenon than what a lot of people think of as when they think they've been abducted by aliens, which usually, in my opinion, are more my lab military abduction or a misremembering of something else that happened. And I think there was a lot of activity in the sensory deprivation tanks in underground bases or other sort of like experimental facilities where you have a person in basically a sensory deprivation tank, and you're projecting an experience in through sound frequency, light, maybe music, maybe there's vibration being let into the tank that can feel like things are crawling on your legs or different stuff like that.
Oh, that sounds familiar. That's weird. Okay.
Yeah, so it's an immersive experience, right? It's kind of like if you go, have you been into it? Have you been in a sensory deprivation tank? Have you been to the float tank?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so if you were to go in there and either, let's just say there was a technology, maybe that technology was some sort of frequency generator combined with LSD or psychedelic mushrooms that could project a particular set of visuals either onto the back of your eyelid, right? There's that, or if there actually was some sort of computer generated scenery that could be on the ceiling or the roof of the deprivation tank or pod or whatever you're in, and you didn't know you were in one. So let's say the kid has been drugged and you're just there and you don't even understand that you're in a box or a tank, and either inside your own mind's eye or in the projected onto the black box or the pod or whatever. I'm sure there's a variety of different kinds of ways this is done, you know, or just like in a theater, right? Like if you just woke up out of nowhere and there was all this chaos going on all around you, and say like an IMAX kind of theater, like it would take you a while to maybe recognize, okay, I'm in a movie theater. And especially if you're a little kid and you hadn't ever been to an IMAX movie theater, you might not have anything to reference it. So you might think this was either a dream or real, right? And yes. And then the other thing that I would say, and this is how like sensory deprivation is funny this way, right? Like you don't know, like when I'm in the float tank, I forget that I'm in something so small, right? Like if you're
therapeutically. Do you float therapeutically then?
I did for a while. I was into it for a bit because I was trying to see if it jogged anything memory-wise for me. And I had some interesting experiences in there, but I think the things that needed memory jogging had already been jogged. So it didn't really do that. It just, it was fine I've had a variety of experiences now. I know a lot of people who do it. But, you know, once you're relaxed, you're not thinking about the fact that you're in a small box, so you forget that you are, and you feel like you're just floating out in the middle of nowhere, really, right?
I could see that. I've had the experience like in sweat lodges and stuff, so I could see that.
Yeah, you could be in space, or you could be in the ocean, which maybe are the same thing, right? Or there's a variety of ways you can have the experience. Now, if you are going into it fearful of being in small spaces and you can't let go of that thought, then you remain conscious the whole time that you're in the small space. But the only time I ever don't know that I'm not floating out in the middle of space or floating in the ocean if I'm relaxed is when I accidentally bump into one of the sides of the thing. And then you're reminded for a second that you're inside of something as opposed to just floating around out in the open, right?
Yes.
So
Interesting.
the sensory deprivation creates spatial distortion, temporal distortion, because you lose track of time. If you really relax and drop in, you'll lose track of both time and track of spatial dimensions. What are things we often hear when people talk about their alien abductions? I have missing time.
Time. Yep.
And oh my God, it was so big inside the ship, right? Right. So if you go and listen to people's, a lot of people's testimonies, right? Like there's all kinds of levels of testimony. Some are more interesting than others. Some are more believable than others. Some are stupid. Some are whatever, right? But you often hear that like it was confusing to them that once they were inside the ship, it was the size of a football field, where outside it maybe looked like the size of a house, right? And so now for me, I don't have memories of ever being abducted by aliens or being abducted by a UFO, but I have remote viewed the inside of a UFO, and I was shocked at how big it was, right?
Wow.
So like, it's just something that exists. I imagine that probably is true of them if they do exist, but also when people are feeling temporal and spatial distortion, right, that go along with these things that we think of as experiences that are hard to understand, you also experience that in the sensory deprivation tank, right?
Sure.
So, yeah. So there's a method. There's a repeatable method to be able to produce those kinds of results, especially when in combination with light, sound, or psychedelics, or all three is probably the most outrageous. You can create all sorts of scenarios then.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I can relate to those experiences through my. I've had a little bit of experience with shamanic work.
Breath work can get you there. Certain kinds of meditation or if you're like I do visioning whether I'm on a psychedelic or not on a psychedelic.
Me too.
Take you there. Dancing, martial arts, different kind. There's many ways to achieve the same kind of state. There's just some of them are more Terrence McKenna used to say, like, when you go do the other stuff, you don't know that it's going to take you there. Generally, when you do the psychedelic, it takes you there, right? So it's like a more sure ride, but I've had some of my most intense experiences and visions have been like totally sober in the bathtub. So not even in the tank, just in the regular bathtub, right? Salt water can generate that experience for some people. Like, for some people that can be very psychedelic.
Salt water. Wow. I've tried saltwater baths, but I haven't had that experience. With cold baths I have, but salt, cool. Heavy.
Like one of the things about the deprivation tanks is they have like thousands of pounds of salt, various kinds of salt, Epsom salt, regular salt, thousands of pounds. Nice. So it's like a saline. It's like a very viscous kind of liquid. It's very similar to like amniotic fluid or how you watch those videos of like if you go deep in the ocean and they find like the sort of saline lake beds at the bottom of the ocean where the water is heavier and thicker, like that.
Awesome. That would be amazing. I want to do that. Fallon is here with a question. Fallon.
Hi, Fallon.
On the screen. Hi, Fallon. Emily, do you have experiences with shadow and tree people when you are using?
So definitely shadow people. What do you mean by tree people? Definitely the shadow people. You know what I mean? Like activity going on out of the corner of your eyes.
Oh, familiar with that.
Right? Like I think what Fallon is asking about is like when my heavy drug use days with more like hard drugs. I mean, with psychedelics, I don't know. I've never had the shadow people with psychedelics. That's like a much more internal kind of experience. But I've used all kinds of drugs. So in my heavier using days, yes, like at a certain point, usually like once you've been awake for an excessive amount of time, then shadow people, bugs, all that kind of crap,
I was going to ask you about that. It's just that experience of have you had that, and apparently you have, whether you're on drugs or not, being sleep deprived for a really long time.
Yeah, sleep deprived for a really long time for sure. and generally a lot of times heavy drug use and sleep deprivation go together. But I've had sleep deprived without being on drugs as well. Like one of the weirdest things that I used to have, this is maybe, and the only reason I don't feel too embarrassed to say this is because I've heard this from other people, right? Like I used to go to parties in Houston when I lived in Austin, right? And when I'd be driving back, right, from Houston to Austin, especially if it was at night, right? Because sometimes I'd go to the party on Saturday night and then hang out at after parties all day on Sunday, and then maybe Sunday night drive back to Austin. So then I will have been up for a couple days maybe. When I would be driving back from Houston to Austin, I would see families of scarecrows standing on the side of the freeway.
Wow.
Right? There would be like a mom and a dad and a little one. They look like the scarecrow from Wizard of Oz or something. And sometimes they'd wander out into the road, but they would duck and go into the car before I hit them.
Oh, shit.
Right?
Wow.
And it was one of those things that like when I heard somebody else bring that up one time, I was like, I was never going to tell anybody that, right? Like that I see little families of scarecrows on the side of the road.
That's amazing.
But it only was ever, that's the only place that I ever had that happen. Like, and I've driven back in the middle of the night from parties in many places around the country, only on that stretch of road. I think the highway is 290 between Austin and Houston. It was the weirdest fucking thing. So I don't know if scarecrow people are like equal to tree people, Fallon. I mean, maybe it's a different iteration. Maybe she lives in an area where
maybe like the eyes in the trees, like you see in those illustrations and stuff.
No.
Or maybe tree people.
No, I would say people that I would be around would say that they thought people were in the trees, but I didn't see people in the trees necessarily. But that wasn't something I looked for. I wasn't looking for it. And I wasn't thinking about it. So maybe if I had, I would. But the shadow people for sure, like one of the things I used to see, like on day 4 or 5 or something like that, sometimes would be like these bugs that looked almost like technological or electronic in nature out of the corner of my eye. And then there's a thing I think called like Slender Man that a lot of people see. Like I used to see that.
Yeah. You said, wow.
Yeah. And then the biggest thing, and I've talked about this before, is like when like coming down, like when I had like stopped, but I hadn't gone to sleep yet, I would lay in my bed and I would see all this like black particles and stuff coming off the walls, but mostly coming out of like the electrical outlets or the vents. And then later, through my research on John Lilly, who I think we talked about last time with the deprivation tanks, I learned Lilly waves, and I think what I was seeing was basically the Lilly wave activity. And what was weird is like I would lay on my bed, and my cat would be next to me, and I could tell she could see it too. So that gave me some level of comfort that like I wasn't just completely hallucinating it, maybe partially. But if we think about, how we always see our cats like react to things that we can't see, and it's like, what are they seeing? I think they're seeing some of the frequency and Lilly wave activity, right? The stuff that is outside of our general visual spectrum, that our band of sound and light and whatnot. But
sure. How did you describe the particles? How did you visually describe that?
So it was just like, so if you almost imagine smoke coming off of walls, but instead of it being like white smoke, just being like little black particles, kind of like, did you ever used to play Etch-a-Sketch or Magnadoodle when you were little, like those little black magnetic pieces? It was kind of stuff like that. The only other time Lilly waves are in all modernly electrically wired houses, have this Lilly wave issue, right? But I did used to see them. This takes us back to the chemtrail stuff, right? Like I did used to see them sometimes in this area between the house that I grew up in and where my mom lives. It's an area that is very well known for lots of weird chemtrailing, but also a lot of variety of different kinds of ships, right? There's an Air Force base over in that area. There's a lot of anomalous activity in that area. And sometimes I would see these swarms of like this black I guess I call it black particle tech, right? And it's like those magnetic black shavings from the Magnadoodle or the Etch-a-Sketch, but it would almost be like moving around in the sky in swarms, right?
Would you say almost like a pixelated video game, or not quite like that? I mean,
sort of. like some people say, oh yeah, one of the things that they chemtrail with is coal ash, right? And so like, okay, I get that. That's the kind of things that, but I think that's like the regular black chemtrails. Have you ever seen the black chemtrails?
I
Like those
have.
are more like standard. This was more like uh, almost like watching a swarm of birds where there's like an intelligence to the way it moves, right?
So how far back does this do the lily waves go?
The lily waves. I can send you a good article on them. I'd have to look it up. I could send you a good article on the lily waves. Danny Katz and I have talked about them in shows and whatnot. But I think it's that same period of time that John Lilly was doing all of his work in, which was like 60s and 70s. I think
Okay.
I think he was born in the 20s, and so his major works were in the 60s and 70s. That's kind of when the whole thing got going.
Recently, I was on Nox Mente, and I was talking about.
Hat tip to Nox Mente. Hello, Nish and Jerry.
Yeah, yes. Shout out to Nish and Jerry. And so they got me talking about things that I'd seen in my childhood. And so I remember seeing, I think it was that in retrospect, but I saw them as bees, but they were a lot like that. They're like swarms of bees.
Yeah.
And they seemed intelligent. They seemed to go, now that I think about it, I think they were in more like places of energy or light. I would see them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I just got a close enough look at them a couple of times that I could see that they weren't bees. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't swarms of bees. There definitely are swarms of bees. But this was something else.
Very small.
This was more like, remember on Etch-a-Sketch or Magnadigital, you had your pen that had the magnet, right? And then you had all these particles that you could direct around the screen to draw your picture or to do whatever you were doing. And this was almost like there was some invisible pen that we couldn't see that was leading these things around. And I just got a close enough look to see that there was no there was no buzzing going on. There was no bees. No. Yeah, this was some sort of black. Now, whether it was like actually solid material or something more energetic or holographic or whatever, I don't know. But that was the only time I've ever experienced it outside of my bedroom or my home, right? Was on this one road between Chatsworth and Ventura. Like this back road that is, I call it long distance telephone road, but that's another story.
Interesting. That's the only place where you experienced that, though, is there?
Outside of my house.
Huh.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think this was either in California or Texas when I was experiencing this. But
there's people I've had this conversation about the black particle tech with listeners, with other people who I've been on shows with and whatnot. It's a thing. But if I'll find that. I'll look up that Lily Wave article and I'll post it in the comments of the show when it comes up, when it's up on YouTube.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Interesting. So let's see. What were you going to say about Marineland?
Oh, well, Marineland is like, I've talked about this a couple of times, like, so I had this, so the way it kind of came up again was Shane, the Runer Bales, used to do this blog called the Runer blog, right? And he, on like the second or third installment or fourth, he talked about his experience at Marineland where he was taken to swim with the big fish, right? And I was like, oh, I know what he's talking about, right? I had this experience when I was a kid where my grandmother picked me up from, she lived in this house that I'm talking to you now from, right? And the gym that I did gymnastics at is about 1.5 miles away from here. So it was the summertime, and she picked me up after my workout, which had been in the morning, probably from like 8 to 1 or 9 to 2 or something like that. And it would be unusual to take a small child under 10 to a day at the amusement park after they've already had a 5 or 6 hour workout, right? Like that seems unusual, right? So she picked me up and took me to Marineland while I was still like in my leotard and stuff like that, right? And we got to Marineland. We didn't park in the parking lot for Marineland. We parked in a residential neighborhood on a hill. The car parked slanted down. And we walked into some kind of back gate or back entrance. And that's it. I don't remember anything else. I don't remember anything else until walking back to the car down that hill. and falling asleep in her car the whole way home. Right now, I've had some little memories coming up, and they seem to be of an underwater, like breathing underwater nature. And I've talked about the underwater breathing and stuff before, but I didn't go around and see the dolphins or see the killer whales or any seals or any of that shit. I went in a back entrance to like some sort of industrial area there or something, and I don't know what I was doing, right? But it was at Marineland. And so, hello, Prague Magic. Shalom.
What's up, Keats? How's it going?
Shalom. So, and then years later, when I got reacquainted with Danny Katz, who I also did gymnastics with at that same gym, she had a very similar experience at Marineland, right? So she and I knew each other from the gym when we were kids. We had a lot of very similar experiences that were bizarre in nature, but we didn't see each other for 30 years. And when we joined back up as adults and started talking in our very first conversation, all of this weird stuff comes forward that two people 4 or 5 years apart in age and not having seen each other for 30 years have these very strong memories of, right? So it was kind of significant. And we have a different set of information that we've researched and things we're into and whatnot. And so it wasn't like we were coming loaded with the same ideas. It was very interesting. But she told me, when I told her about this experience, that she once went to Marineland with her mother, which was kind of unusual. She was closer with her father or whatever. She went to Marineland with her mother, and she hurt herself at Marineland and was taken to a first aid facility, like underground there, away from her mother. They wouldn't let her mother go with her.
Wow.
And that she doesn't have clear memory of what happened there, right? So that sounds really weird that a little child who hurts himself would be separated from their parents at the amusement park, right?
Yeah.
So, she has a set of memories that, we'll let her sort of explain or whatever sometimes if she wants, but right, like, it's always this sort of bizarre underwater kind of experience. And she also, with no memory of having a good time there that day or anything, right? When I think about, like, I went to amusement parks a lot as a kid. All the other trips I remember, going on the rides, eating the fucking ice cream, the funnel cake, whatever, right? Like crying at the end of the day because your parents want to leave and you don't want to leave, right? We all have these memories. That was not what this was. This was like in and out, pretty quick, no memory of what happened and exhausted afterwards, right? So,
interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Getting echo like that. That's weird.
What do you got back there? I see the stone, but what's the device that you're pushing when you think you hear echo?
Bluetooth speaker. Are you getting the echo?
Gotcha.
It?
No.
Good. It just happened out of nowhere. We'll see how that goes.
It's the Bluetooth speaker that's causing you the problem.
It could be.
All right. So that's kind of the Marineland experience.
That's a real world experience. Well, that's interesting. I don't have any weird memories. I've been there as a kid. I don't remember much about it.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say.
There's like a small delay that's making that happen. So I'm not trying to cut you off. It's that I'll start saying something and then at the same time. So I apologize.
Oh no, that's totally fine. I get it. No worries.
So the reason that what makes the whole Marineland thing strange, I mean, it's strange in and of itself, is that Marineland is where John Lilly did a lot of his like experimentation, particularly the Marineland on the East Coast, right? But they were all connected to each other, right? And there was Marinelands all around the world. So my guess would be at a certain point, the research that he was doing expanded outward to the other facilities, and it wasn't necessarily him conducting the programs at all the Marinelands, but think about that. That's a great place to hide an underwater experimentation program with children and psychedelics and whatever, because there are children coming and going from there all the time, and people know that animals are being held in tanks and the kids want to go see them. Right. And so it's genius. It's brilliant.
Totally. In a spooky kind of way, but yeah, totally brilliant. Wow. So Keats and Amanda. Hey, Keats. Hey, Amanda. They, if you guys have any questions for Emily, please feel free, shoot them out there, or for me. But yeah, well, I heard you and Michael talking about the glass bead game. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, we're in the process of discovering exactly what the glass bead game is. I don't think there's a clear answer from anyone at any time in history of exactly what it is, and I think that's the point. But I think it's
I love it already.
yeah. So I think if for anyone who's been watching the Project Kids series that Michael and I have been doing, when we fell upon the glass bead game, we recognized, oh, that's what we're doing, right? We're playing the glass bead game. So, it just coincided kind of with sort of launching into some new like levels of things we're doing with the Project Kids stuff. And so the Project Kids thing is kind of like a group endeavor at this point, and Michael and I have moved on to this series now where we're calling it playing the glass bead game, right? And so now that we know what we're doing, now we're doing it with intent. So we had our first recording of the glass bead game the other day, and the amount of feedback that we got from universe immediately, and the amount of the same kind of phenomena that people around us who know what we're doing also received immediately, let me know that once the game knows you're playing it, like the game will play it with you whether you know you're playing it or not, but the game likes when you're aware of it, right? And so once the game is aware that you know you are a player in this game, it starts to give you feedback right away because it wants to be played more. It's like an instrument wants to be played. It doesn't want to sit in the box, right?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I don't know. I just know as you were talking, I just kind of did a quick search for the glass bead game because I don't know. I just heard about you guys talking about it this morning for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And now I'm talking now, and it's all sounding very, very fascinating. So it's about synchronicity and accepting that. And once you start to see that, it sounds like once you start to see that, it just opens up to you and you start playing the game. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's kind of like making meaning and beauty of a nonsense bullshit culture.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, at least that's what it is in its modern iteration. So it's taking like a variety of topics, issues, modalities, arts, methods of doing things, and reinterpreting them through the filter of the other, right? So like have to stop thinking of things as what we're told they are and start thinking of other possible ways to perceive the same person, place, thing, information, set of numbers, series of letters, all that kind of stuff, right? Start running it through filters other than the obvious first, second, and third layer, right?
Right.
And then also like, okay, so start thinking of things as things other than what you're told they are and see if you get a response, right? So we just, just from within the show, that first show we recorded, literally, like when we got off of the recording, I went to go get some lunch and I'm sitting at Burger Lounge waiting for my food, right? And I'm looking at Zero Hedge and whatever. And already generated during the time we were recording were all of these stories that had ideas and elements that we had talked about during the show strewn throughout them, right? Wow. Right. And so, which that's not a unusual phenomenon for me to experience, but the amount of them that I received, that Michael did, and then everything else that kind of happened that day, and it bled over to Laura and my friend Jeff and all the people who kind of know what we're doing, they started having it and it's just increased. And so like here's a substantial one, right? Like, so one of the things that I've talked about for years and years is that like, I think that and I prefer to watch tennis than a lot of other sports, but a lot of these big sports stars, that they are archetypes or characters in a grander play, and they are here representing something, and they are involved in a set of storylines that are at sort of a battle for dominance and whatnot, right? And so Michael and I were talking about tennis players in general, but largely about Roger Federer and his relationship to Rolex and what that might mean, right? And we were kind of talking about him as a character in a story or the sort of king of a timeline or type of thing, right? So the show, we recorded it on Tuesday. It came out today, right? So today's Thursday. So it came out, I had it scheduled to post at noon. It came out at noon. right? This morning I'm laying in the bed reading stuff, and there is, looking at stuff, and a video comes up posted on YouTube. And we had been, so the men's tennis tour is called ATP, Association of Tennis Professionals. So we were going through different possible ways of perceiving what ATP is coded for. And then we did this with like BTC and Doge and GME, like stocks and cryptocurrencies. We had talked about ATP. So literally this morning on the ATP YouTube channel, there was a video posted called The Story of Roger Federer. And in the video, he literally referred to himself as a character. So we got confirmation from Universe and from Roger Federer himself that he is what we said he was, right? Like in this way, my guess would be that Roger Federer, maybe in a different way than Michael and I are, he is a glass bead game player, right? Like he plays the glass bead game. That's why he's a better tennis player than many of the others, right? That, the top game players are not simply playing the game. They're, they're making a sort of intergalactic symphony of like movement and meaning and whatever with what they're doing, right? Not all of them. Some of them are standard, but whenever you see an athlete or a musician or whatever that's special in an indescribable way, my guess would be that they're engaged not only in the thing that you think they're doing, but they're also playing the glass bead game.
I've got a sense of that from seeing people. Yes.
Yeah.
Golfers in mind, but yes, tennis for sure. And yeah.
Have you ever read the book Golf in the Kingdom?
Oh yeah, I love Golf in the Kingdom. Michael Murphy from the Esalen.
Yeah. So the character, I can't think of his name right now, and I haven't finished reading. Seamus. Yeah. Seamus, right?
Seamus.
Yeah.
Yeah, Seamus.
He's definitely playing the glass bead. Shivas Irons. Yes, Shivas Irons. He is playing the glass. He is not only playing golf, but he is also playing the glass bead game for sure.
I get it. I love that. That was that's my religion for quite a while. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's the glass bead game.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm reading the book, The Glass Bead Game, right now, but like from what I've already read and some research I've done on it, and once I became aware that the glass bead game existed, it started showing up everywhere in references. Like I'd be doing a show about something totally else with someone totally else who doesn't even know that I'm interested in the glass bead game and whatever, and we'd be talking about a topic of their choosing, and the glass bead game would somehow show up in relation to that, right? So it's kind of like it does that. It plays back, right?
So I had to bring it up,
yeah.
Of course.
So yeah.
Is there an actual game, like a physical game?
Nobody seems to know.
There is a Japanese glass bead game called o.O11O.o that I was fascinated with as a kid, and I wanted to bring it to a commercial status someday. When I was a kid, I was like, as a teenager, I was like, I want to make this into a board game.
Yeah.
But it's a glass bead game.
So they, in the intro of the book, where they're giving you hints as to what the glass bead game is, they do talk about a different variety of the game that is played in the East. So this was like more amongst certain kinds of intellectuals in Europe, right, during a particular period of time. But they were very well aware that this was also going on in the East, and then there seemed to be some, at least on a metaphysical level, interaction between the way the game was being played in the West and the East. And when we were doing some research on the glass bead game in the Project Kids group, I recalled when I was little, I used to have this game that I played with my dad and my sister called Penta. Did you ever play Penta?
Yeah.
Right? And when I looked at it,
I do remember it.
So Penta is like, it's a board game that looks kind of like a Masonic Lodge floor to a certain extent, and it's a little piece of leather that you roll up, and it comes in like a poster tube, like Sunbird, right? It comes in like a poster tube, but it's like a leather board, and then it has this little sack, and in the sack there's all of these little glass beads, right? And that's what you use on the game board. And the whole thing looks like one of the little artifacts that Michael Wan would have made. You know, he likes to make all the bags and crystals and stones. This looked like a game that maybe he would have made, right? And
Cool.
I don't remember what the point of the game was, but I did play this with my dad and my sister when I was little, and it definitely has a very different feel than playing like Monopoly or Life or any of that shit, you know? It felt like something you would have played like in The Princess Bride or in Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, right?
Awesome. I totally know what you mean. Like that's a real game. I never played it, but I definitely have seen it.
So there's that. Yeah.
The glass bead game that you're referring to, and that's kind of what informing what you're doing, is by Herman Hesse, right? And
Yes.
so, okay, so wow.
So there's also like I always, and I never understood why, but now I do. So I've always had an obsession, quite a fascination with glass beads, right? Like as a kid, I liked to do all the beading arts and crafts, but I didn't like those plastic beads that all the other kids, or the clay ones. I liked the ones that were a little nicer, right? And throughout the course of my life as a kid, from maybe the age of 6 to 18 or something, my dad probably spent thousands of dollars on beads for me that I would start little art projects and do stuff. And never used all the beads. I liked buying them, and I liked looking at them in my little case that I kept them in. And I also, unfortunately, liked sometimes tripping over the box and accidentally, and then they would all end up in the carpet, and then I'd spend a lot of time trying to pick them out of the carpet, but usually the cleaning lady would vacuum them up. So all of these beads that I always wanted to buy more. Like I was somehow obsessed with beads, and I don't know why. Now, the other thing that's interesting is most of the commercial beads that are sold in the United States are manufactured in Chatsworth, where I grew up, right? So that's kind of like West Trim is there. West Trim is like one of the main manufacturers of beads. So I always thought it was so interesting that I'd go to like a bead store somewhere far from my house, but the beads actually came from somewhere near my house, but there was no bead store near my house, right? So that, and then when I got a little older and I could really appreciate craft and skill, I became obsessed with these. Well, the other thing is, when I was little, my parents took me to Mexico, and I loved watching the glass blowers, and they made beads as well. Like they made all sorts of interesting stuff. But when I was a little bit older, like 18 plus, I started liking these beads that were, it was blown glass that would have like a mushroom or like a goddess or a mermaid inside. It was like a technique to make them. And then people would wear
size, or like a bigger, like a marble size, or like a bigger, or what?
All from marble size all the way up to like regular amulet size or whatever, a little bigger. Sure. And what was interesting, so like I liked these, and I would sort of collect these to put on. I'd make hemp necklaces or different kinds of things. And then one day when I was living in Tucson, right, I was coaching gymnastics still, and I was living in Tucson. And one day I wandered into this bead store that was on the same street as the gym I was coaching at. And I'm in there, and I have my little basket, and I'm getting a whole bunch of stuff. And the guy who owns it just is like, you can have those for free if you want. If you would like to, you can have as many beads as you want for free if you'll work here once a week. And I was like, all right. So like he literally let me walk out of his store with hundreds of dollars worth of beads.
Wow.
No other guarantee that other than me saying that I will come back on Friday from 9 to 1. Right?
Awesome.
He didn't ask for my phone number. He didn't ask where I lived. Now, I think I mentioned that I worked at the gym down the street, so, you know, whatever. But I thought that was kind of interesting. So I ended up working at this place with all these beads I only worked there for a few months, but I would work there for free, and I could take whatever I want, right? And while I was there, I discovered that in the garage, they blew glass, and they made those things there, right? So it was so weird. Like, there's part of me that feels like there was maybe something else going on there that I wasn't yet aware of, or I kind of fell into something that was preordained for me or whatever. But I think that my guess would be, because I did research MK Ultra and the glass bead game, and Tavistock came up, and whatever. My guess would be
there's a connection there. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, my guess would be that there is a technique that they use in the mind control kind of programs to create a framework for training a kid to play the glass bead game, and that probably one of the rewards were the beads, right? Were the beads, or that, like, you know, when they were programming certain aspects or ideas, they would do them using a bead as something for you to focus on, something that sort of looked magnificent in the light and had colors and looked different from different angles, which is probably why I was never interested in your typical cheap plastic beads. I always wanted these phenomenal, shiny things that looked like very fancy marbles with holes in them or whatever, right?
Yeah, the really unique ones. Yeah.
That would be my guess. I'm not saying that for sure. Emily's not saying that that is a fact or whatever, but to me, it explained about whatever this fascination is with beads. I don't know. I'm sure lots of other people have the fascination with beads, and they may or may not have that kind of experience, but I've never pursued jewelry making or crafts at a level more than like, boy, I really like these beads and I want to have them all over the place. You know? So, and I don't wear them. So
interesting.
Yeah.
That's kind of I wonder if there was anything sinister behind like the marble craze or the pog craze even, really.
Well,
that's kind of very similar.
So my friend Steve Crimmy, who I do a lot of shows with, like, and he's a prolific author and reader and whatnot. And so he and I have had some conversations about the glass bead game, and he understands where I'm going with it. And he's like, "So what do you think the point of the glass bead game is?" And I said, "Well, we're playing for all the marbles." Right? I mean, wow. I think that's what's going on at like a very high spiritual level right now. And anybody out here who's listening to you, they're engaged in a certain level of, we're living our normal lives, but on a spiritual level, there's a thing that is often thought of as a battlefield, but becomes much more manageable if you start to think of it as a game a field that you're playing the game on. And we're playing the glass bead game. It's not just me. I'm just aware that I am at this point. I've become aware of it, right? So we're playing the glass bead game, and we're definitely playing for all the marbles at this point. Right? We're going to get them or something else is going to get them. And so this is a great time to play the glass bead game, which is way more fun than sitting in fear of whatever the dumb fucks in Washington are doing. Right?
For sure. Definitely down to that.
I love you, Amanda. Did you see that? She loves marbles. She can't find hers, though. I resemble that remark.
Me too. I lost my marbles a long time ago. Yeah, that's funny. So I was trying to think of when you're talking about marbles and like something bad that could happen with marbles. I don't know. Did you ever see? It was a Bruce Willis movie from the 80s. Maybe it was called something about blind date, maybe, or something.
I think I've heard of that. I have to say one more funny thing. The day we found out about the glass bead game, like it came to our awareness, Laura, my partner, did find a marble in the backyard, right? We go in the backyard all the time. We've never found a marble. We found the marble the day we started playing the glass bead game.
Wow.
So I like the symbolism of that, right? Hi, Jerry.
Jerry Cthulhu's in the house. What's up, Jerry? No, so I was just going to say that Bruce Willis had this scene where he walked into the bedroom and there was, for some reason, marbles on the ground, and he had this spectacular stage fall where he slipped on the marbles and fell, but... Right,
so I think that we are given this scenery as part of like, well, we're putting it out there for you, right? Kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything, and it's kind of like what it echoes so many things of what you're just talking about. Like,
since you mentioned Bruce Willis, I had an interesting interaction with him once as well.
Oh, really? Tell.
So I was working at this restaurant in New York on the Upper West Side called Isabella's. Right. And it's kind of like one of these restaurants that has like a sidewalk cafe aspect to it. Right. There's the indoor part, and then in New York, you don't really get a patio at the restaurant because there's not a lot of space for that. So there's tables all along sort of the wall of the restaurants on the outside on the sidewalk. Right.
Yeah, they're here, Boulder. Yeah.
So there was this one table at the very end. To me, it seemed like really the worst patio table because it's closest to the intersection and all the noise. But for some reason, that table would always get like the big celebrities sitting at it. Like I waited on Bono at that table and Bruce Willis and whatever. But Bruce Willis is a fucking weird cat. Like he's just he says weird things. And so he asks me. He was telling me, and this was like 20 years ago, right? He wanted to know if I knew that today was the lunar equinox, which is funny because now we're all very aware of all the things that happen on lunar equinoxes, right? But 20 years ago, I didn't know anything really that much about, maybe a little bit, right? So he was very clear about drawing my attention to the fact that this was the lunar equinox and telling me all about it and whatnot. And I ended up chatting with him for quite a while. And at the end of the conversation, he told me that I reminded him of his ex-wife. And I was like, oh, that fucking sucks. And then later I realized that his ex-wife, his ex-wife is Demi Moore. You know, you know, I have a much different view of celebrities. I mean, I never was titillated by them, but I didn't despise them then the way I despise them now. So at the time it was like, I'll take that one. That one's pretty good, you know?
I'm totally there with you on every bit of
I think it was the voice, he said. He said my voice was deep like hers. So
you do have that quality to your voice. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you're not the Hollywood type, and you're in Hollywood or LA. That's amazing.
This is why I lived in New York, but yes. But he was interesting. He was definitely a unique character. He's definitely more like you know, those roles that he played like in the 80s were all like sort of action-y, you know, kind of, they weren't super intellectual, right? He played some of those later in his career that were like more out there and weird and you know, mind trickery kind of stuff. But my thoughts of him were always from the movies from the 80s, and I was like, you know, you think of him as like not super intelligent, but I could tell from my interaction with him that he was like a weird, metaphysical, thoughtful kind of guy. I don't know what he's into or not, but he wasn't anything like. He wasn't.
Actors. Oh, I'm sorry. It's that delay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, he just was not what you would expect him based on his movie roles from the 80s or 90s, you know. I guess it was more like his character in like, what's the Monkeys one, 12 Monkeys or Fifth Element or something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. More like that. He was more like that. But this was sort of before those things were popular, right? Before we had those things.
Totally. Well, he's one of those actors that's been in several movies that have turned out to be maybe some sort of predictive programming or something, some sort of foreshadowing, right?
Yeah.
Fifth Element.
Fifth Element, I think, is a huge, and 12 Monkeys, I think both of those. And he's been in a lot of stuff.
Even Die Hard, you might say, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw something very interesting about Die Hard. It was basically saying, posing the idea that Bruce Willis was the villain in that movie, and that what's his name, Rickman was the hero, and that he was really trying to liberate, he was trying to liberate a cause basically, and Willis was the policeman taking him down.
Yeah,
interesting.
I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know.
Really?
Fifth Element, and I've seen 12 Monkeys. And I've seen some other movies he's been in, but I can't think of what they were right
now. Hudson Hawk, because I always remember that he was going for an espresso, and he never got one, I think, until the end of the movie. But was it ongoing gag?
That's
the only thing. I remember weird shit like that from movies in the 80s, especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're all saying that he was pretty short. So he was a small guy.
Yeah, I'd say like somewhere between like 5'6" and 5'9", something like that. Not huge, yeah. Yeah.
Jerry says
I'm small though, so everybody's big compared to me. So.
Really, you look tall. You seem tall.
I'm definitely not tall. No, on my best, right? On a very tall day, I'm 5'2". So, but everybody says that. Everybody, I mean, unless they know that I'm small because I've said it, they're always surprised when they meet me in person because they think I'm going to be tall. So, yes. I photograph bigger than I am, I guess.
Yeah, film does that, exactly.
Yeah.
The tricks of Zoom. Did you ever, I don't know why this came to me, but did you ever read a story called Harrison Bergeron?
Is there another story that has the word Bergeron in it? Because that feels familiar to me.
Maybe. I could have that wrong. I might be
I'm thinking about a movie called Cyrano de Bergerac. There was a movie called Cyrano de Bergerac, so I'm confusing those two things. But no, I have not heard of what you said. Which
is an amazing story in itself. And Roxanne. Was, what's his name? Steve Martin.
Yeah.
Was based on that, of course. Yeah. But I forget why. I totally forget what I was just asking.
Bergeron. You were going to ask me if I'd ever heard of or watched Harrison Bergeron.
Right. So this weird memory that I had of reading hour in school when I was young. I don't know how young, elementary school. but I seem to remember the story, and I thought that's what it was called, and it was about this dude, if I remember correctly, that he was basically dumbed down to be more average with the rest of the group. Like he could see too well, so he had on shitty glasses to make him not see as well, and he had like big earphones on his ears because his hearing was too good, and stuff like that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Cthulhu
No, that sounds about right to me.
It's a Bert Jones. Vonnegut.
You were reading Kurt Vonnegut in elementary school? I love
it. Maybe it was just me. I'm not sure. I read a lot of Doctor Who and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams stuff, but Vonnegut, yeah. But that was a creepy ass story, and I don't know why it came up to me the other day, except that I don't know, it just did.
But I mean, that's like what's happening now, right? Like we're in that space that, like, you know, the decision. So I was ranting. I recorded a show with Danny Katz yesterday. We do a series called Words, and we have a little patrons after segment called Afterwards. And I went down a rant. That probably is not interesting to anyone but me about things going on in the gymnastics world, right? Because I was a gymnast and whatnot. Yeah. But I was talking about how, like, the level of excellence, in my opinion, in college gymnastics has decreased in recent years. Right. There are more people who like there used to be like, you know, a few girls that were really good and then everybody else was sort of far below them. You had like the people who maybe just missed the Olympic team, or maybe they went to the Olympics, but they were a minor character. So, and they decided to do college gymnastics and they were very good. And then everyone else was at a different level. Right. And now what you have is like a large middle class in the college gymnastics. And what's happened is these girls who are capable of doing a lot more, they don't do it anymore because you can get as much points for doing the things that the middle class is doing, right? So it's great. Like there's not very many girls who suck. I don't mean this in a nasty way, right? I was a college gymnast and I sucked. So that's going to be my opening statement about this, right? But the bottom has moved up. Right. But now it's like literally they're almost all doing the same thing. Every once in a while, you get someone who stands out and sparkles and is still doing amazing stuff. But there's this huge middle mediocre class, right, in my opinion. And again, like I know that all gymnasts are amazing, but when you're like, you know how it is, like work, like, you know, okay, like I'm going to talk directly to Jerry because I know Jerry has consumed as much esoteric media as I have, right? And like you're a connoisseur of it, and you have some stuff that you think is much better than other stuff and whatever, right? And just kind of like what we're experiencing in media in general right now, where it's like there just isn't quite all that like, oh my God, this is amazing stuff that there was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, right, Jerry? There's all this stuff that's just kind of like here in the middle, and actually there is still like a lot of sucky stuff, but like there isn't this magic. There's a little bit of it still, but the girls the kind of people who used to do the magic have now decided that they'll just join the middle class anyway because they get a trophy too, or they get a stimulus check too, or whatever. Yeah. So it's the same thing you're talking about from the story, that like instead of like the pursuit being, wow, this kid has like great like kinesthetic skills. By Jerry has great kinesthetic skills, or like has fine-tuned hearing to the point that he can hear 5 miles away. Like, what can we do to enhance these abilities or to train everybody else to be able to start to reach that level, while maybe respecting still that he's unique and someone might not be able to do it as well as he does it. Instead, it's like, no, we can't allow that because it's going to make the other kids feel bad. So let's put earphones on his ears so he can only hear what's in the room too, right? Like, that's the society we live in right now.
Oh, for sure. And you're saying that's what you're seeing even in gymnastics, that's kind of how they're treating that, and that's what they're like making that.
I mean, I guess, are you interested in gymnastics at all? I mean, I can talk about it for a minute. So,
yeah, my martial arts was heavy on the acrobatics, and I used to teach gymnastics to youths and young adults and things.
Okay, so what's happened in international gymnastics, I'm just going to stick to women's gymnastics for this because more people are more familiar with women's gymnastics, and obviously so am I, right? So what's happened in women's gymnastics is Simone Biles is just a freak of nature who has run away from the rest of the pack. There's no competition between her. The only event that anybody else can even compete with her on is bars. It's her worst event, but she still usually gets a medal, right? And she's good on it. But in terms of all the other events, like she like literally the start value of her routine is many points higher than everyone else. So she can fall multiple times and still win the competition because she's that much better than everybody else. It's gotten to the point, as per your story, that at the last World Championships, she introduced a couple of brand new skills that nobody has ever done. So they're named after her. But what the FIG did, FIG is the Federation of International Gymnastics did, they don't want other people doing those skills because they feel that they're too dangerous and people might get hurt if they try them. So they didn't give them a high rating. So she's doing stuff that is far harder than anyone else can do, and she's not going to be rewarded for it. So now she's not going to do it. Because why would you do something if you're not going to get points for it, right? If you can get the same amount of, now she sometimes does it anyway to get it named after her or to, because she wants to do it, right? But they have given her no incentive to continue to strive to achieve more stuff. She just does it because she wants to, but she's not incentivized to in any way, right? In fact, you will be penalized. There's certain skills that people have come up with that they have banned from gymnastics because they don't want to. Now, I understand that we don't want to kill ourselves doing gymnastics, but at a certain point, it also puts a cap on excellence, right? It's putting the earphones on somebody. So in international women's gymnastics, like that's pretty much the story. Is Simone Biles is like not even in the same stadium anymore. She's off by herself in her own private Idaho, right? And everybody else is competing for second and third place, right? And and there's a good amount of people competing for those spots. And then in college gymnastics, the entire level of college gymnastics has raised, but the difference between the excellent people and the people who are just good in college gymnastics has gotten smaller, in my opinion, right? And you don't have people like, so in the 90s and in the early 2000s, there were gymnasts who were doing skills that are harder than a lot of the skills that girls are doing now, right? So it's like there's been now there's a lot more like bonus points for combinations and little weird tricks and rules and things like that. But for someone like me who is a connoisseur of high-level fine gymnastics, it's become a less satisfying experience. And that's coupled with now all of a sudden the mainstream media is interested in college gymnastics because some of these floor routines are going viral, like Caitlin Ohashi a few years ago and Mia Dennis this year. Now, Caitlin Ohashi was doing difficult stuff and she was a great performer. But we're also starting to see routines that are jazzy and have a lot of gloss. But in my opinion, like the person who's like Mia Dennis can do a lot more difficult stuff than she does now because she won't get points for it. So why, right? So she's being clapped at for doing something that is below her talent level but exciting to watch. And nobody cared when she was doing hard stuff, right? And to me, I don't like that, right? That's kind of like, but you know, I got dressed down by Danny on our show yesterday for being a snob about that, you know, and I get what she's saying. It's all hard. It's all wonderful, but there's become something less satisfying about the experience for me, you know, based on like this equalization of everybody that has happened. That is what when you were talking about this Harry Bergeron, like that's what I'm thinking about.
Yes. And that makes me think about like other instances of that, and maybe instances where that was imposed upon them, like a fall from grace sort of thing. So I'm thinking Tiger Woods at the moment, like he was so clearly above everybody and every time he golfed, and then he had like the personal debacle or whatever, and then so he was knocked out of the game and all that stuff, and he really hasn't quite been the same since and everything. But so it seems like he reached a level that like nobody could compete, and so they had to like level the playing field in some way or something.
Did you ever see that show? Well, I know what you're talking about. I'm not a golf fan, but I know the phenomena you're speaking of, right? Did you ever see the show that Robert Phoenix and I did about Tiger Woods?
No, I've got to see that.
So Robert's theory is that it's pretty far back. It's like probably back in 2017, maybe, or 2018. And I don't know if it's in the title, so you might have to look into the show description to see. But Robert's theory is that his wife actually beat him to death the night that they had their fight when she found out about his cheating, and that we've been looking at a clone ever since, and that's why he's not able to play as well, because they perfected the cloning technology.
fucking, I could go down that rabbit hole because he definitely has changed.
Right. And he's definitely changed. Right. And there's too much, there was too much, like they could, like, he still had a lot of time left on his contract with Nike. So they had to come up with, something. Right. And then, of course, it creates interesting theater for us to watch afterwards when he has the dramatic fall and then a little resurgence. And I don't know if they just perfected the new iteration of the clone. And so he's playing a little better. Or I don't know how I don't know how it works, but his past is very interesting with Bob Hope and his relationship with his father and whatnot. But it's pretty interesting. Like, so what you said is like, okay, well, maybe they had to sort of like take him out or create this giant fall because otherwise golf would be boring, right? But look at what happened in tennis, right? For fucking 20 years, the same people have been winning. Right? Like we're still hearing about Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal and Serena Williams. And right. Yeah, we hear a little about Novak Djokovic here and there, or someone else pops in a bit, but still the bulk of the titles of the last 10 years have been won by 4 people, like 3 or 4 people. Right. And there's almost no other competition for that. And so like a normal mind would think that's not good for the sport, but fucking 20 years later, everybody still wants Roger Federer to win everything, right? So it's like and Roger Federer is also sponsored, well, he was until a year and a half ago, sponsored by Nike, and also is friends with Tiger Woods. Like Tiger Woods used to sit in his box.
Oh, that's right.
So I think they decided to go a different route with Roger Federer, and Roger Federer has always been loved. Now, he hasn't played in the last year, which is interesting. Michael and I got into that in the glass bead game, how it's pretty interesting when you look at what's going on with time and with the Wimbledon and with what tournaments were played this past year, which ones weren't, and who played and who didn't, what might be going on at a grander level. But because Wimbledon was the only major that wasn't played last year because of coronavirus, right? So all the other majors were played, even though the French Open was played in the fall instead of in the spring, so it was delayed. But there was no Wimbledon last year. So the only other times that Wimbledon hasn't been played there was one time that I can't remember, like there was a name for what happened, but I don't know why, but it's basically a war. And then World War I, it wasn't played for 3 or 4 years. World War II, it wasn't played. So in our heads, we're like, oh, okay, so 2020, we're in World War III. Like coronavirus is part of a bio-warfare that is World War III. It's just not been announced as such because they only cancel Wimbledon during wars that affect Great Britain.
Wow.
Right. So, okay. And Roger Federer is like the king of Wimbledon, right? He's, like that's his place that he does the best. And that's sort of where people, that's his best surface and whatnot. And he didn't play last year. Right. And he's not playing right now. Like he was supposed to play in Australia, which will start next week, Australian Open, but he's not playing. Right. And it's kind of, like what's going on? Is there a level of warfare going on that he is staying out of, right? Or that he's, I don't know, right? I think there's more things going on than what we are told in terms of how this stuff all works, right? But
that's a little bit separate from the idea of that he was maybe like Paul McCartney, basically. Tiger Woods was basically Paul McCartney.
Right. I don't think that about Roger Federer. I don't think that we've been offered cloned Roger Federer. I don't think so. Yeah. There's a uniqueness to the way Roger Federer moves that I don't think would be able to be replicated. And too many people know now we've seen days when he's off a little bit, right? But it's off because he's trying to move the way he moves and it's not working well, but he's not doing something different than what he normally does, right? Really? Like there's a very athletic quality to the way he moves that I don't know that you'd be able to fool somebody. Now, probably if we found a golfer, if we could find a real life magic, if we could find the real life Chivas irons and sit with him and have him analyze the stroke and the play and the movement and all that kind of stuff of Tiger Woods, I'm sure that he would say that this isn't Tiger Woods, That either we're looking at a different person or something in this person's psyche has changed so drastically that they can't even present movement in the same way that they used to, right? And even though Roger Federer's play has up and down over the years and certainly declined a little bit as he's gotten older, he still moves the same way, right? There's a balletic quality that I've never, it's like a very Peter Pan-like movement, right?
Sure.
So I don't think that Roger has been replaced. I think that there are times when either he chooses to or he is told that he's going to be sitting out this round.
It could be just, I mean, it could be just natural aging, like aging of an athlete even. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, but there's a different way that he does it in terms of like, he'll just be like, I'm taking the rest of the year off, right? Kind of thing out of nowhere, like, not going to play the clay court season this year, or I'm out for a year, period, right? It's not quite like you go and you see, the injury's not quite ready, not going to do it. Like when he's out, right? It's not, and I've watched sports my whole life, and I kind of see how injuries are with people and whatnot. It seems something's a little different with the way he does it than your typical athlete. Maybe that's just the style.
I get you. Yeah, I've watched sports a lot as a growing up and stuff, but I haven't in a few years at all. But you brought up a couple of things that something really juicy that you would just touch on, and I didn't write it down. I hope I remember. It was really juicy.
Lives like a ballet player. 2020 is World War III. Shiva's Iron.
Yeah, I was just a little. I have some things I did write down, but one of them was about Shivas that I do some like sort of transpersonal meditation sort of stuff. And anyways, he was one of the deities that I would work with for a while in my magic practice. So Shivas is really cool. He's a really interesting thing to get involved with, and I can see that, and like just kind of from that point of view, I can totally see what you're saying about Tiger, and I never considered that before. That's wild.
I would love to drink some scotch after a round of golf with Shiva Irons.
Yeah. That's mainly why I want to go to Scotland and go do that. But so that brings up a couple things, and that's all that stuff you were just talking about. One just tiny little segue is the Nike connection, maybe with. Have you seen I think it's Ole Demigard's stuff?
I haven't seen any of his recent stuff, but I'm very familiar with Ole Demigard and his narrative, and I largely agree with him. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Me too. I haven't seen anything recent, but wasn't he talking about there was usually a Nike shoe left?
Nike shoe. Yeah. So Nike is a lot of stuff. Like the swoosh is like the Saturn ring or the, whatever. Now there was the whole weird thing like back in New York during the early 2000s when I lived there, when you would walk through like this certain park, there was this Nike billboard that when you walked under it, you would hear a voice go, just do it. Right? Like they were experimenting with voice to skull technology and stuff like that.
Wow.
So, but I would say, and I hadn't thought about this until just now, but about the same time that Roger broke from Nike was when they started sponsoring Naomi Osaka, and when they started making the big move towards like Black Lives Matter kind of propaganda with their sponsorships and stuff like that. So that is definitely a different public look or style than what Roger Federer represents. And he ended a very long contract with Nike and I wouldn't say he does still wear Nike shoes. He's now sponsored by Uniqlo, which is a Japanese company. He did go through legal proceedings with Nike to get his logo because they used to make hats and shirts with this RF logo that he had. And it is interesting that his initials are RF, right? Right, like RFID, whatever kind of thing. But he does now own his initials, which is an insane thing to even say. He ended his relationship with Nike at about the time that they went very identity politics. He was sponsored by them for about 20 years. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, and It isn't. That is one of the most interesting things. Michael and I were doing a little bit of it the other day, and I think we'll do it more going forward, looking into the sponsorships of the athletes, right? When you really start to get past how much money they're making, and yes, we all know that when you're sponsored by these companies, you're like, it's like they're branding, and you're their cattle and their slave. Past that level to like what these entanglements mean on a more metaphysical level, and what these storylines and these characters are actually playing out on the bigger battlefield of brand, right?
Right, exactly. I can't wait to see that show.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it in this Glass Bead game that just came out. We were really kind of all over the Rolex thing, because which players are sponsored by Rolex. So
why?
Time.
What's that?
Because we've been doing a lot of stuff on time and time tracking, and sort of we were looking into the tournaments that are sponsored by Rolex and the athletes sponsored by Rolex. And we did discover another unusual thing about Wimbledon, and that it's in part of the rules of Wimbledon that if the player is sponsored by a clockmaker, they have to wear the watch.
Huh.
Right? Like, it's weird that that's part of the rules of Wimbledon. You'd think that would be part of the legal the agreement between the sponsor and the athlete, but why would Wimbledon care about that?
Why would they?
Right? Unless what we're really competing against is time. And they want to know which time you're competing for. And they want the evidence to be on the field, right? So it's something much grander and much more esoteric than just hitting the ball back and forth across the court, right?
Oh, for sure. I love playing tennis. I haven't watched a lot of it, but I love playing it. I didn't know that fact at all.
Yeah, I didn't know that until yesterday either. Laura does really good research while Michael and I are doing the shows, and so she's able to throw out some of these little tidbits. But yeah.
Big Rolex clocks a lot of times when they're teeing off in golf, by the way.
Rolex sponsors Australian Open, Wimbledon, and many of the golf. And what's weird is that tennis and golf are not really timed sports, right? So why are there so many clock sponsorships with them, right? It's like, obviously, like basketball and football, you're playing against the clock. Now, they keep track of time in tennis, but the only way that there's a time limit is in the last few years they've introduced a 30-second time limit between when the point stops and when the next point begins, right? So you can get a penalty, you can get a warning and then a penalty if you take more than 30 seconds, right? Which some of the players like, But other than that, there's no, there was a match that went on for 3 days at Wimbledon one time because John Isner and Nicholas Mahut couldn't break each other, right?
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So it's obviously not a time sport. So why is time so important to it if the sport isn't about time, or is it really about time? We just can't see it. Right? And more esoteric, right? Like the tactic that Roger Federer and a lot of other depends on the way you play. There's different ways to play, but Roger Federer takes time away from his opponent, right? Yeah. Right. So if we're really like in a game of like sort of like cops and robbers about time kind of thing, right? And if the player on one side of the net is sponsored by a different time or watch company than the one on the other side of net, are they even on the same timeline? Are they battling for timeline dominance?
Wow.
Right? So, I don't know.
That's cool.
Now, I may be making a very, very large deal about something that literally is just a game hitting back and forth, but I don't think so. I think there's more to it than we're told. Yeah.
I can go there totally. I mean, golf and tennis are kind of, for me, there are a lot of parallels and stuff. And when I golf, I like it. I transcend time. I get in my flow state, and I do. It's a transcendence of time in many ways, and so I kind of feel like
Harvey's such an interesting guy. Yeah.
No, there's actually I've just heard recently that there's kind of a connection with the Tavistock Institute and Esalen and maybe even all that stuff, but. Yeah. I don't care. I mean, there's always stuff you resonate with, right?
Always stuff. But right, the Tavistock is interested because it's interesting. They're not usually the ones making it up, right? They usually tap into something interesting that is happening, and then they commercialize it and take control over the way people identify it in their mind and start tying it to other ideas, right? They start infiltrating, it's like a cognitive infiltration about what something is and what it means. But no, many of the tennis players are not only golfers, but they're very good golfers. Both Marty Fish, who was an American tennis player, and Rafael Nadal, who's obviously one of the greatest tennis players of all time, both play in international golf competitions and have been ranked. I know that Rafael Nadal just came in 6th in the Balearic Golf Championship, right? Wow. He's sponsored by Nike in golf as well, and Marty Fish has played at high level golf tournaments. I'm sure the other tennis players, a lot of them play well, but those are the two that I know that have prominence on a certain level, at least in their own countries and in those sports as well. So and I'm sure that there's probably a lot of golf players that are reasonably good tennis players. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all country club activity. It's all,
true.
Good
true.
Boy sports.
Yeah, that's all true too. What about, so is there any tie between cricket and tennis?
I don't know anything about cricket.
I don't know much about it, but I was just thinking in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, there was a big thing about playing cricket being, they were reenacting a way to travel through time, basically. I don't really remember. It's been a long time. But
also, if you remember, croquet is played in Alice in Wonderland, and it's incredibly important to that story.
It is.
So I do think there is something about, and Shivas Irons talks about this when he's explaining to Michael Murphy in Golf in the Kingdom about how important that contact point is and where your thought and your intention is at the time that the golf club strikes the ball. And I'm sure, I know when I watch tennis, there's a certain sound that I hear off the racket. When I hear that sound, I know that person has hit a winner.
Yes.
Like I am a terrible tennis player, but the same sound that I hear, it's a different sound, but it's the same. It means the same thing. When I hear a girl on the beam whose footwork is with a certain sense of certainty to it, I could listen to that footwork and know without looking. I could close my eyes and hear that kind of footwork on the beam and know that this person is an exceptional beam worker. Right? Like there's just a certain staccato to it, a certain rhythm, a certain noise. Like there's certain noises, gymnastics noises that I really like, and same with golf and same with tennis, that you know what I'm talking about. There's a certain crack of the ball in baseball, right? When you hear this contact in a certain way, you know that shit is out of there.
Yes.
Even if you don't see it, you hear it and you know.
It's just, it's just like, it's like that Zen clap or something. I don't know. Yeah. It's like, or more than that even. It's just, it feels so right.
See, I think one of the big bits of damage that's been done to the alternative information community and conspiracy people and truthers and stuff is that they've been sold this bill of goods that is true, that pop culture and entertainment and sports, that's bread and circus for the plebes, right? And on a certain level, that's true if you just understand it simply as entertainment, pop culture, or sports. But when you start to look at what it might mean in a different kind of, under different circumstances or narratives, or under the conditions of the glass bead game, or that looking for a certain set of sounds or a certain quality of movement or whatever, right? That means really something much more. Then you start to get answers that you're never going to get from the most truthery, whatever website on the internet, or from the best documentary or whatever, right? There is something there that is fundamental to the music of the universe, right? Now you have to sit through sometimes, you have to sift and develop experience sort of watching to know who the people are to watch, to have that experience, just like we all have our favorite, sort of side actor in movies that do a lot of weird roles that we appreciate, we have the background, someone who just plays in a band of some singer we like, but their music's fucking amazing. It's, the thing that makes it so good. Or like for me, there's a lot of, I like a lot of the big tennis players and the bigger gymnasts, but there's also gymnasts and tennis players that are not very well known, but have some very unusual thing about them that I find to be just absolutely fascinating. Right. So like, and then I'm always looking for that. Right. And I enjoy that just as much as I enjoy the dominant performances or the major gameplay of some of the bigger characters. But yeah, I think that, like, okay, so this is I had this conversation with my friend Jeff the other day, and like he's been digging at trying to understand, the reality and time and the technology. And I mean, he knows a lot. Like, he definitely is a connoisseur of a lot of high information. But like sometimes, and we've all been up against this, where we hit a space where it's like hard to get to the next level, and he doesn't watch any sports at all. He's not interested in them. I'm like, you need to go find anything. It doesn't have to be one that I like, where there's something about it that sort of captures you, and start paying attention to that, because it's going to show you something about what you're looking at in a totally different arena that's going to help you make sense of it in a way that you haven't been able to. So I think it's important that people have like some kind of art they like and some kind of sport they like, and some kind of like all these random set of activities that they can then bring what they know from their experience with those things to apply it to this information we're always digging to. And it's going to give you a unique perspective on it that's going to help you make sense of it in a different way.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, I felt that way for as long as I can remember. It's like, take something and apply it, anything, all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's always a metaphor to something deeper when you look, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I recommend people don't feel bad about liking sports if you do like them, right? Like my thing is like, don't spend more of your life watching someone else do sports than you do engaged in the things that you're good at or that you like to do. Right. So like, balance it. But then the other thing is like, I know a lot of people who like to watch sports, but don't play at all, or don't do any exercise. So like one of my things is like, whenever I'm watching sports on the TV, not always, sometimes when it's like a really big match or a big meet, I'll just sit down and enjoy. But like when I'll get on the treadmill and I'll watch tennis while I'm on the treadmill. So
cool.
Like, I'm exercising, I'm moving, but also that movement helps my mind sort of get into things in a different way and, whatnot. So at least I think it's silly to sit on the couch and eat potato chips while someone else is exercising. Right? And then people are like, why did I get so fat? But time to exercise.
Really sharing in that magic. It's kind of a way to actually sort of empathize or something. Take it literally. Yeah.
So I suggest people like watch sports, man. Right? You can know that all the sports are fixed by gematria, whatever you think that means, right? Like I know about all that information and I agree with it on one level, and on another level, I think what's causing that pattern of gematria to happen, and I don't think it's people. I think it's something else, and it's being expressed through people, right? But sports is just interesting that way. You can't control every aspect of it. It's impossible. There's large elements of it that are controlled, but that dance between the controllable and the uncontrollable is what makes it interesting.
That's a really nice thing to say. The dance between the controllable and the uncontrollable is what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Huh. That's actually echoes something I heard somebody else say recently. I hope I get it right. It was by Mark Twain. Something like, freedom is the moment between when you're told what to do and you decide how to respond.
Yeah.
And to me, that sounds a lot like what you just said, and that is a lot like that.
Yeah. Yep. So watch sports. Fun.
I can't get into them like I used to, but definitely I believe you're right. And my experience in participating too, definitely always in martial arts, especially, I could see something else. There's something else there that you're embodying, especially if there are classical movements involved, or even just human movements that are natural movements, just doing those things. Yeah. There's something about it.
Yep. So in just a few minutes, I'm going to have to jump off because I need to get outside at some point today before it gets dark. So was there anything else that you wanted to chat about before we
Mhm.
pop off?
Well, thanks so much for your time. I was just hoping to kind of chat and meander because it's fun to talk with you, and I love to hear the things that you're coming up with and the things that are coming across your consciousness.
Yeah.
It seems to resonate with a lot of stuff that I'm into, and um, I think Michael's going to come on the show kind of in a little while, so it'll be interesting to see.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love both you guys, especially when you get together. And so your stuff with the Project Kids and also the Glass Bead game, that's all, is that Patreon level?
So at this point, I have a bunch of stuff going on. So like I have everything is pretty much centralized on my YouTube channel, right?
Okay.
So I have various podcasts I do with other people and then things I do on my own. Most of my content has a public importance. The thing I do with Robert, that's all publicly available. A few of my, some stuff is like all public, but most of the things have like a public hour and then a patrons hour. And then like the thing that Michael and I have gotten into has gotten very intense and very in depth, and we spend a lot of time on it. So there is some of that content is available publicly. Some of it's available at the $5 or above level on Patreon. And then some of it is actually an interactive experience available at a $25 level where there is multiple opportunities to hang out with other people who are part of the group, interact with myself and Michael, and receive all of this content because we are generating quite a bit of content. And a lot of it is very personal to our lives. Like we're in order to try and work this out for ourselves, but also like so that when we people can see what we're doing and they're like, okay, I can do that too. It requires the sharing of some things that are personal and also the amount of time we're putting into it. And so that is behind a $25 paywall, but with that you get a lot of content and a lot of access to us and a lot of informational exchange and whatnot. And so we're doing that, and we have quite a few group members who are there already. And the more the merrier, because each one of us comes with a unique perspective on things and a unique set of experiences. And when something keeps showing up across all of those, then you really understand what like a node, where there's a node of where something happens, right? Like, okay, this why so much focus on this? Let's go play with that. So, so everything's there. So I have a variety of levels on Patreon that have a variety of kinds of content and interactive experiences, some of them related to Project Kids, some just totally my own stuff. And then I also just recently started a page over on locals.com because a lot of people don't like Patreon, and I certainly am not a fan myself, but it's just at this point the easiest to work with. But I can only offer one level on Locals, so I have some public content there, and then I offer the same thing that is the $10 level on Patreon, which is a lot of content and a lot of group activities. So it's emilymoyer.locals.com. So you can go there if you prefer that to Patreon. And I will have a website popping up here sometime in the next month or so. And I'll tell you about that when that happens. But if you want to contact me for nutrition consultancy, for nutrition consultation, or for life coaching, or now I'm also doing storytelling hour, which is where either you can come and tell me a story and get my thoughts and perspective on it, or if there's something you've heard me talk about that you would like me to go more in depth and want to hear a story of mine, I offer those sessions as well. So you can just email me at emilycmoyer@protonmail.com just to say hello, or if you're interested in any of that stuff.
I love that. I hope people do. That's awesome. I mean, so many people just need to be heard. They need to hear their stories and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, and I have a lot of weird experiences. So I guess at this point I've kind of become good at recognizing the unusual elements of, finding the little things that are interesting in some of these stories and go, well, maybe here is sort of actually where the entrance point to something else is and whatnot. So yeah, and people like telling me stories and they like hearing mine. Sometimes I'm shocked at how people continue to like to listen to me talk, but I appreciate it as well.
For sure. And even though you put out so much content, I have so much to keep up with. I still keep doing it. For sure, keep doing it.
Yeah. So.
And I love talking with you too. So you're welcome to come here anytime and talk about things. And I hope later this month that I'll be a Patreon member and be able to check out your stuff more in depth, especially the glass bead stuff is fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. And also, like, if somebody wants to come just try out a day at the Project Kids Social Club sometime, just contact me by email and we can work it out, see if you guys want to participate in that. So.
Ooh, all right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be in touch with you for sure. Coolness. Anything else on your mind or anything at all?
Nope, I think that's it, man. Thank you so
Coolness.
much for having me. You guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Cheers. Thanks everybody for dropping by. Take care.